Thank you, Susan. I'm going to focus on the concept of people-centered solutions for resilience. And I'll first talk about the emergency situation of the Amazon, and I'll talk about this approach that I call people-centered and a call to action. We're in a situation that most of you probably know because it's very well publicized, the fact that the Amazon is going through very rapid increase in deforestation rates, and we are facing the approximation of an ecological collapse. The rate is the worst rate since 2006. So there was a huge increase over the last few years, which is indicated in this map. Deforestation went down from 2003, from 27 went to 4, and from 4 went back to 13. So that's the big picture. As was mentioned by Ram and John, there is a loss of resilience that has been documented, and a tipping point is something that is already there. There is an issue of climate injustice, and I was talking to Mohamed before this event about maybe a follow-up process focusing on the issue of indigenous peoples, both in Africa and in other parts of in Latin America and other parts of the world, because it's a very clear case of climate injustice. It's probably the clearest case, more so than the other segments of the population. Oops. The question is how to build resilience for indigenous people. And this image just provides you the kind of community that I'm talking about. These are communities from 20 to 30 families by rivers. Usually these are the only way, this is the only way to get to those communities. This is a community that Bishop Marcelo has visited, and I hope Cardinal Turkson will also visit us and see that with his own eyes. This is a community of Kambeba Indian. It's not moving. Oh. Not advancing. Oh, yeah. Well, the paper that Ram prepared for this, I think introduced quite nicely, and actually the conference booklet, these three crises, the climate, the inequality, and the biodiversity crisis. The question is how to develop practical solutions, since we heard that we are running out of time by the various presentations made here. And I'll offer this conceptual framework. I think in order to deal with the inequality crisis, we have to have approaches that are centered on people, that are labor intensive. And the climate crisis has two work streams, adaptation and mitigation. And I'll focus here on resilience, because adaptation is linked to another solution, which is nature-based solutions that also address the biodiversity crisis. So developing this line of thought, we end with this concept of people-centered approaches to deliver nature-based solutions for resilience. There is a growing evidence that nature-based solutions provide the most cost-effective alternatives, but it's not only nature-based solutions. What we're talking about is nature-based solutions with the people focus, because you can plant a huge area with eucalyptus with an industrial type of enterprise that is different from the from the tree belt movement that Wangara Maathai launched in Africa and that Mohamed spoke about. So I think we have to qualify what kind of nature-based solutions we're talking about. And what I'm arguing here is that we should have a call for a people-centered approach for that. And what does that mean? It means focus on the youth mostly, because if we're talking about climate change, it's a generational issue, and the future of places like the Amazon will depend on how we treat youth. The goals of this people-centered approach is, in the case of the Amazon, is to reduce both deforestation and degradation. And an important point to stress is that degradation can be a result of forest fires and unsustainable logging and unsustainable use of other resources, such as fish or non-timber forest products. And on the other side is improve livelihoods so as to increase resilience and invest in Amazon bioeconomy. And I was talking to Joaquin about this. Our concept of Amazon bioeconomy is focused on the economy associated with native biodiversity. So we're not talking about soybeans or cattle farming, which are also part of bioeconomy or can be part of bioeconomy. We're talking about those that are based on native biodiversity. A principle for doing this is to focus on participatory and bottom-up approaches. As Joyce was mentioning, and Mohammed as well, I think likewise we need African solutions for African problems. We need Amazon solutions for Amazon problems, just to borrow the expression from you. So there are a lot of knowledge locally of indigenous peoples who are not scientists, but they have fantastic knowledge, ethno-ecological knowledge. And also there are universities and research centers that we need to foster this bridge between ethno-ecological knowledge and scientific knowledge. The conceptual approach that we have developed includes all the 17 SDGs, and the 17 SDGs, they land along 8 priority themes that and 2 focal points. These priority themes result from over 1,000 participatory planning workshops. So it's not that we came up with this. This was a result of the prioritization process done through these community-based workshops. And that includes education, community infrastructure, and here solar energy, as Robert was mentioning, drinking water and that kind of infrastructure, entrepreneurship and income generation, empowerment, research and innovation, environmental conservation, transparency and management, and health. And at the core, education. Education is key. And I'm not sure how that goes in Africa, but in our case, most public schools, they teach things that are very similar to probably what is taught here in Rome or in Berlin. It's sort of physics, chemistry, and the French Revolution and all of this, but don't teach about the reality, how to manage the local soil, how to prevent erosion, how to manage sustainably fisheries in a particular lake. So one of the work streams that we give highest priority is what we call relevant education, education that is relevant for resilience and for improving livelihoods. And the second is income generation through bioeconomy. So these are the small universities that we have built in the middle of the forest. So since the call that has been made is for practical solutions, this is what I can offer as a couple of alternatives for concrete and viable solutions. So I make the point that each territory of indigenous people should have an university, and an university that teaches subjects that are relevant for that particular region. So if that region is dependent on agriculture should have an agricultural focus. If it's dependent on fisheries, it should have a fisheries focus, and so on and so forth. And I will just give the example of fisheries management. This is Pirarucu, to illustrate bioeconomy solution based on sustainable management of natural resources that combine science with indigenous knowledge and business, a business perspective. This is Pirarucu. It can be as big as 2 meters and as heavy as 200 kilos. And the point is that the 15% of the value of the fish stays with the community. Most of it stays with intermediaries and storage companies. So what we have done is to invest in the value chain so that a larger fraction of the rent is captured by the producers that are then encouraged to do sustainable fisheries management. And by doing that, we went from 350 to 1050 reais per kilogram of fish. So it's doable. But we have to have intelligence to understand, intelligence for each of these value chains, understand exactly what is the role of the middleman, how we can reduce the role of the middleman, how we can empower, how we can foster entrepreneurship at this level. The other part of this strategy is payment for ecosystem services. We have something called Bolsa Floresta, which is the largest program for payment for ecosystem services in tropical forest areas. It's applied in these areas in the map, the dark green. These are 14 million hectares of areas that have communities like those that I've shown you before, and which has a focus on women. So it's a monthly payment. The health system, we were able to reach 7,000 communities in the outbreak of the COVID, which was a major, major effort. This is an indigenous village called Cambeba. Talking about solar energy, this is a picture of a system that we are developing as an alternative to the conventional on-grid power supply. This is isolated solar power generation, and the good news is that it's not only viable, but also from a management point of view, one of the solutions that we developed was to train local youth to do the management, because in these areas which are very remote, transportation costs are very high to do maintenance. So what we did was to provide technical education for them to do proper maintenance and installation as well. These are results in terms of income. When we're talking about resilience, we have to reduce poverty. Now, that's one of the best ways of creating resilience. And this graph shows different territories in different bars. In blue is 2009, and in green is 2019. And in the meantime is 2015. And the dotted line is the extreme poverty line of the World Bank. So we're able to move, on average, the income level above the poverty line with a 200% increase. And one of the tricks was to do things that people like. Instead of pushing things from outside, is to do what people think it's promising. Even though it may sound like not a very good idea, it's better for them to do what they think it's a priority and learn from that and then improve, as we all do. So it's less patronizing and more bottom-up. This is deforestation. There was a reduction over time, especially last year. There was an increase in deforestation rates in protected areas outside of our focus of 28%, and in the areas where we work was a reduction of 55%. This is based on official satellite imagery of INPE, which is the Brazilian government's thing. So conceptually, what I think our experience tells us is that we have to look at local problems, come up with, with solutions based on participatory planning, do pilots, evaluate those pilots, and scale up, and so that we have large-scale solutions. For the case of solar energy, for example, we're now in the process of extrapolating the experiences that we have had for the whole Amazon. So, and the same goes for drinking water and so on and so forth. So we're going to have a big budget, and that relates to the moral issue we were discussing the session before. We want to put up this number, which is going to add something like $30 billion. And I think this is very small compared to the value of the Amazon. So I think we have to put these big numbers on the table and try to come up with appropriate means of finance. It's a moral issue in addition to other aspects of the equation, as has been discussed before. So the grand challenge that we have is to move from a deforestation-based economy to a green, innovative, and inclusive economy that has proper valuation of carbon and other ecosystem services and sustainable forest products. The call to action that I'd like to finish my talk is with a focus on an ecosystem of partners. So to deal with the challenges of the Amazon, one institution alone will not do it. It has to be through alliances. And maybe this also applies to Africa and other parts of the world, developing world. But I think there is a need of institutions that can survive changes in governments. And here I put my previous experience as state secretary. One thing which is terrible of Latin America, not unique of Latin America, but Latin America is very bad in that respect, is that every new government changes completely what was being done before. It just says, this was completely trash, let me begin from scratch. And that means that we don't have long-term programs. So my thesis is that we have to have civil society organizations that can bridge between different administrations and try to maintain as much as possible long-term programs. And so this is the role of meso organizations. And again, I think this is an interesting dialogue with what's been discussed about Africa also, the importance of strengthening local organizations that are not based on projects that are going to last 1 or 2 or 3 years. They're going to be there forever because they're rooted in their territories. So this ecosystem of partners is our ecosystem. We have 325 partners, and this through different alliances. The COVID alliance was one, and for energy is another one, and so on and so forth. So this is one of the points that I want to make, and to illustrate this, I think we have to multiply funding. We have just been selected by KfW to implement a relatively small fund with 31 million euros. We need to multiply that by 1,000. You know, it has to be 30 billion, not necessarily managed by our institution, but I think it's the kind of investment that we need really to move forward. So I think we need to have global partnerships. And again, I go back to the moral issue. This picture illustrates the meeting of the water of the Amazon River on the left and the Negro River on the right. The Negro River is black because of organic compounds, and the Amazon River is white because of being a young river from a geological standpoint, lots of clay. And going back to this conceptual framework, I think the solution that or the approach that I offer to this seminar is that we should focus on people-centered approaches that are able to lift people out of poverty and thereby create resilience, and also create the conditions to deliver nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are the best in terms of cost effectiveness, and I think they're doable. And finally, I think it's possible to keep hope alive. And here, go back to Pope Francis' call for being hopeful. I think the evidence that we have ahead of us from climate change is not one that give room for optimism, but we have to keep hope alive that eventually we can bend this curve and build resilience. Thank you.